When you're fed up with fighting food and your body, join us here. I'm Ali Shapiro, creator of the Truce with Food program and your host for Insatiable, where we explore the hidden aspects of fighting our food, our weight, and our bodies, and dive deep into nutrition science and true whole health. Fair warning, this is not your parents' health care. This is a big rebel yell to those who crave meaning, hunger for truth, and whose lust for life is truly insatiable. Believe me, freedom awaits. Welcome, everybody, to Season 6 of Insatiable. This is our kickoff episode, and so now I get to reveal the theme, which is radical healing. And by radical, I'm using Angela Davis, an activist definition of radical, which is when we get to the root of things. So we're going to talk about what's possible when we get to the root cause of what ails us. And when we heal when we're in choice, not when everything goes our way. So we're going to explore how to get to the root of our stories and what radical healing changes in our lives. Before we get there, I just want to invite you guys to join me in my 2019 Truce with Food program. It is a personalized online coaching experience that creates lasting food freedom. Registration opens in January. We all know diets are a losing battle, and if we don't want to get up, what's our option C? That's Truce with Food. This program with me only runs once a year, so please, if you're interested, come join me. You can join the waitlist at alishapiro.com/trucewithfood2019. And when you join that list, you'll also be added to my regular list, and you'll be getting a lot of free mini lessons so that you can get a taste of it before deciding. And before I get to today's episode, I just want to thank all of you who left reviews. If you remember, I was trying to get to 100 reviews by the end of the summer, and we did it. We literally had 100 at the end of summer, and we've since got a couple of more. So for everyone who's left a review, I really appreciate it. Some of you are so funny, even in your reviews, but you have all left really thoughtful reviews, and I appreciate it. And if you haven't, we would still love one. It helps more people find the show so that we can start to change the story about what food and health really is. Okay, so now on to today's episode. Many of my clients eat out of alignment with their goals because they feel lonely or alone, even during times when they're surrounded by people. Yes, you can be alone amongst other people. And most don't recognize the loneliness as a trigger for their eating. In today's episode, Radical Healing, Break Free with Naked Communication, I invited Sage Hobbs to discuss healing through self-expression and deeper intimacy. Sage is going to share her story around being diagnosed with cancer and how naked conversations supported her through both the challenges and benefits of that diagnosis. Plus the healing effects of the kind of intimacy reached with naked communication and why relationships are critical to making changes in our lives, including food freedom. But first, a little bit more about today's guest, Sage. Sage B. Hobbs is a coach, speaker, author of Naked Communication, Courageously Create the Relationship You Really Want, and host of the Naked Conversation podcast. She's known for her bold, insightful, and dynamic approach to communication, leadership, and personal growth. Sage holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Pennsylvania. Woohoo! Philly, represent! And a master's degree in counseling psychology from the University of Colorado, Denver. Prior to creating her current work, she spent a decade working with teens and families to navigate the wild path of growing up. She's a mom of two, a cancer survivor, a proud teacher's wife, a, quote, retired school counselor, a world traveler, a living room dance party aficionado, and a book lover. Thank you, Sage, for being here.
Oh, it's so fun to be here with you, Ali. Thank you.
It's funny, as I was reading your bio, I know that we met through Sarah Snyder, who's also been on the podcast, and I totally forgot how much we have in common, including we both went to Penn, my parents were teachers, and we both had the same cancer.
I know, it's bizarre. We were absolutely meant to meet. I recall that the first time we connected when you were on my show, that I was like, oh my gosh, I love when there's such synchronicity. I'm like, all right, yeah, me and Ali, of course, it's meant to be.
Yeah.
Totally.
So I want to open up with your story around being diagnosed with cancer and what it opened up in you, both the challenges and benefits.
Okay, great. So let's see. I was 23 years old and I had recently graduated from the University of Pennsylvania. and gone off to Kenya after graduation to teach and to live in a rural village, and something I'd always wanted to do. I had like a deep calling to adventure and to travel, and particularly to Africa. And I came home from that trip and had my first like job interview, like a real job, professional job. I remember like Ann Taylor black suit. Remember Ann Taylor and black? And I took the train. I was back at my mom's house, and I took the train into Center City, Philly, to go meet, to go to this interview at this nonprofit in Philadelphia. And I walked in, and there was like a boardroom with 4 people, and I was nervous. It was right. It was like this, at that point, it was probably one of the scarier things in my life. And it went well. I got this job, and I was like, woohoo, I'm going to change the world. I'm going to transform public education. I'm going to like eradicate poverty, all the things you think you can do when you're like 21 years old and, full of hope and optimism. And I went to work in sort of my dream job. And about probably only a year or a year and a half into it, I was at my desk in West Philly. I was working in 4 different West Philly public schools. And I was sitting at my desk, and I just sort of had I remember this part, and I do not have a great memory for details at all, but there's certain things you do recall. And so I remember sitting at my desk with my elbow on my desk and my hand right above my collarbone, like working on something at my computer. And I felt this little like pea-sized lump above my collarbone. And I was kind of like, that's weird. Like, I don't feel sick. I don't know if it's a lymph node, whatever, weird. I really thought not much of it because I was like young and invincible in that way that you are in your earlier years. And fast forward, I did not do something about it right away. And then I had it on the other side above my other collarbone. And I remember that I had this beloved friend from Penn. One of the things I loved about Penn, Ali, was the international component. So like I have such a cool collection of girlfriends who were of different backgrounds. So I was at my friend's parents' house outside of the city, and her mom is Persian, and she's like a healer. I don't even know what the translation would be in our culture. She's a healer. And I asked her to feel it. And I remember, because she said to me, like, you need to go to see someone. And she was not a traditional Western practitioner. It kind of took something for her to say that, And I remember that was when I was like, oh shit, like, okay. And I went to my primary care doctor as you would, like not even really thinking of what this could be. Honestly, it truly did not occur to me that it was going to be cancer. Like I can actually say that I don't know that even crossed my mind until I went to the doctor. And actually, initially, I still didn't think of it. She told me I probably had, I don't even know what she said. She said, here's a cream for this like hives I was getting on my legs. And you're probably sick. I went back. I don't eat. See, here's what it gets fuzzy. I went back, and she said, you need to go see a surgeon because they do lumps and bumps. And that's when I felt scared. I'm like, okay, that feels not great. Like, see a surgeon, they do lumps and bumps. Basically, you're going to have a biopsy. And so I had a lymph node biopsy and waited anxiously for a few days. At that time, it really wasn't instant results. I didn't get that information right away. And I remember that my dad was with me at my apartment in Center City. I was living downtown Philadelphia in this cool old historic building. And the doctor called me. And in that moment, as soon as I answered the phone, I knew something was bad, because a nurse, in all of her not so infinite wisdom, said to me, hey, if I call you, it's going to be fine. The doctor will only call you if it's something serious. Mm-hmm. So basically, as soon as it was the doctor's voice on the phone, like I knew something scary was happening. And all I remember is he said cancer. And then I like threw the phone down and like had a moment, my dad sort of picked up the phone, and then I breathed and he handed it back to me, and I was able to hear, you have Hodgkin's lymphoma. We need to figure out what stage. We need to bring you back in for, further tests, blah, 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 because that's actually all I remember. Like, you know what I mean? I'm sure there was much more said, but what landed with me is cancer. And the thing in my brain was, oh my gosh, you could die. That's the meaning I made up right away, right? Like I couldn't even get the information fully dialed before I went to what our brains do, which is to make meaning out of circumstances, right? Like to make it mean something.
And that can be a good thing. I think sometimes in coaching, we say you have the choice, but it's also survival. Like you need to know what to do with this information.
Totally. Right. And you can't help it anyway. Like, I'm a coach. You can't help it anyway. What you want to be able to do is uncollapse it. Right. So I didn't want to stay in the place of, oh my gosh, I'm going to die. I needed to like, okay, hold on, pause, separate, like, this is what's happening. You have this disease from the worst case scenario. I did need to sort of pull those two apart, but my initial reaction was total fear, and panic. And then I got super grounded, which is kind of my coping mechanism. And I got into action, and so fast forward, what happened was a series, and you can ask me more, whatever you think people would want to know, but a series of tests, not all great experiences, the experience of changing doctors for a better fit until we landed on what stage I was, which was 2B. So I was like, I hadn't caught it right away, but I wasn't in my mind totally effed. You know what I mean? I was like a little bit, 2A would have been better than 2B. It was like slightly more advanced than the middle point,
That's interesting because I was 2A, but back when I had cancer, I sound so old. A was was that you didn't have any symptoms, and B was that you did. So they didn't even stage it like that. They didn't probably know as much back then. So it was like,
or I don't remember it properly.
Oh,
that's also 100% possible because I had the symptoms that I had were night sweats and these hives.
Symptomatic. Yeah, those were symptoms. I had none of that. So you have that.
But somehow that equated in my mind. Here's an interesting thing about the brain, right? Like in my mind, my memory of it is that was worse.
Well, it was because you were having night sweats and hives and I wasn't.
Right. But it was worse in terms of my prognosis.
Oh.
Like they had some concern because there was the possibility of me getting a laparotomy, which I remember being a very scary decision, which would be like an enormous surgery where they cut open your abdomen and actually pull cells from other parts deep further along than the initial lymph nodes where they know the cancer is. And because I was in that in between stage, there was discussion of whether or not they needed to go that far to get that information. And we decided not to, for which I think was a great decision and, turned out fine. But I remember that there was some fear around, was it beyond where we have noticed it being? And maybe that's because of the symptoms. I don't know. I don't remember. Isn't that interesting? You remember, and you were younger than me. I was 23 and I'm now 41, just for those who don't know me, perspective. And I don't remember that exact detail. I just remember that it wasn't awesome, but it wasn't the worst. That's how my brain filed the memory,
Yeah.
And so I did both. First I did chemotherapy and then I did radiation and I took a leave of absence from my job. That was a really big deal for me. That was a challenge. So challenges, there were the physical challenges and the psychosocial challenges, right? From the experience. There was the physical challenges were, it was scary. It was not fun to have chemotherapy. It made me feel like super miserable inside of my skin for a few days, like the most tender skin experience I don't know how to explain it other than like, I felt like I wanted to crawl out of my skin. And I would sometimes ask my dad, I would go stay with my dad and stepmom for a few days after each treatment cycle. And I'd like ask him to like squeeze my feet because I needed like the pressure on my feet. Nausea. I actually never threw up. I'm really grateful for that.
You didn't?
Mm-mm.
Wow.
That was a huge change in the decade between me and you. Huge change. Yeah. Because I met somebody else who had Hodgkin's like us, the Hodgkin's Club, the club you never want to be a part of. And he was also a child. He had his about a decade before me and he was violently ill often. I never threw up. They were able to mitigate that with the type of chemo how it had changed from that decade between the two of us.
That's great. I mean, I'm glad because I remember I had this, it's so funny because I'm like you, I'm not actually great with details, but certain things someone had sent this like poinsettia, like it was a plastic bucket of like, it must have had something in it and it was poinsettias around it. And it became my barf bucket. Like we called it the bucket. Like,
poor
where
me.
is that? And it was just like, I remember too, like eating and my like jaw would cramp up. I got a lot of finger cramping, like, but I'm glad that it's getting better because they even gave me this thing called Zofran, which is anti-nausea, but it never really worked.
Oh, Zofran's supposed to be like a miracle for a lot of people. That's unfortunate. that you
Well, we're all different, right?
I know, we're all different. Isn't that the truth?
Well, yeah. So what I guess I'm also hearing in this is that like you had to switch doctors, and I don't necessarily want to say that there's benefits, but like what it opens you up to. And how did how did you start to learn to communicate? Because did that have any, I guess that's my question, because I'm thinking about how many times people, when they're struggling with their doctor, or the doctor isn't working with them or whatever. And here you are in these high stakes situations. I mean, it's like the highest of stakes.
Right.
And I can imagine, especially being 21, it's like, I don't want to make the doctor mad, or something doesn't feel right. Or is that kind of what got you into seeing the importance of clear communication that I am imagining starts with ourselves and what we want?
Great question. You're a very discerning host, Ali. I love that.
I hope I wasn't leading the question.
Well, no. Well, let me go to this question of benefits. There were lots of benefits, and again, choice, right? You could choose to see all that was shitty about having had cancer in your youth, right? And there was plenty. There was plenty. And you could also eventually come to a place, not while you're in the heart of the crisis, but hopefully afterwards, where you can reflect and be like, what did that give me? What was the gift of that experience, right? And one thing for sure is self-advocacy. So I will say, like, there was something that happened inside of me where I got really clear that I needed to look out for myself. And I was never docile. So it wasn't like a huge leap from some girls and women who are, we're all conditioned, I believe, in the West here to pretty much be pleasers, take care of other people, not rock the boat, different from the boys. For sure, the messaging. That's my opinion and experience through being a school counselor for a decade, now raising a boy and girl myself and seeing how they're being trained by society. So I was not the most docile girl. Like I definitely had some of that core fire inside of me. And at the same time, I was pretty much a good girl, like I followed protocol. I worked hard, got into Penn, got the A's and B's. Like, so there was an edge for me around like doctors know what they're talking about. And where's my voice inside of that? Where's my voice inside of that? Because what happened was I went to get a bone marrow biopsy, which is a freaking I thought a very painful experience where they put a hollow core needle basically into, above your pelvis, above your butt, and not your pelvis. What would that be? Like your sacrum area.
Yeah. And I woke up in the middle of mine because they didn't get enough the first time. And
they didn't put me to sleep. So that's not going to change in a decade. No sleeping. I was wide awake.
Oh, that was the most I think that was the most painful medical procedure I've ever had in my life.
Oh, okay. So here's what happened. So it hurt. And it seems like here's an interesting thing. It was terrible. And when they got the results back, he was like, it's not exactly clear, but I think it's this. And, I think we learn a lot from the adults who get to advocate for us when we're young, you know what I mean? Thankfully, if we're lucky. And I had been taught to be curious, right? So like, I was like, that doesn't feel great. Like, I don't want that sounds too inconclusive for me to decide my treatment plan on. What's up with that? You know what I mean? So somewhere in conversation with my parents, we said, well, maybe we should go get a second opinion, right? And again, you and I talked about this a lot when you came on my show. This is such a position of privilege. Like, I am acutely aware also, something I learned is, through all of the challenges I faced, like, it is not fair. The system is not, opportunity and access for healthcare is not equitable, right? So I'm speaking knowing full out that even getting a second opinion was because I had parents who thought that was possible. And we had the kind of health insurance that had made that available to us, right? Mm-hmm. So when we got that second opinion, he said, I want to do another bone marrow biopsy because honestly, this is inconclusive. And in that moment, I remember thinking, well, what the hell was up with that first dude? Like,
his ego.
Telling me those were his ego, right? And I was, like I said, I had enough of that fire inside me to be like, and enough fear. I have always managed my anxiety, right? So there was also enough anxiety inside of me to be like, hold on, I want to know for sure what's going on here. You know what I mean? Like, so that I want to live, so we can figure out what the best choices are. So it did start, there were lots of tests and opportunities to examine communication, voice, and then also like nuance of relationship. So when I went to this other doctor, he was like, he was like, I really don't want to say anything disrespectful of a colleague, which I really respected that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But he said, but it really shouldn't hurt. The bone marrow biopsy shouldn't hurt. And I was like, what? That shit hurt. I was like, okay. He's like, so I'm going to do another one. And I was like, oh gosh. He's like, but it's not going to hurt. I've done thousands. I'm like, okay. And I remember this part for a little humor in this heavy story. There was a really cute intern. Remember, I was 23, and I'm like facing my mortality in a way that I was ill prepared to face. And he's like, do you mind? No, I have an intern learning with me right now. Like he's going to participate in this. And the rooms, because this was Philly, it's not like, the suburbs, those doctors' rooms are so tiny. And I remember like, oh my gosh, there's like this really cute 20-something-year-old intern, like looking at my butt, that was my last thought before he did the procedure.
That reminds me, when I was in Lynchburg, Virginia, and I was diagnosed with IBS, they made me get a colonoscopy because of my cancer history, and it was the cutest doctor. And there was like Lynchburg, Virginia.
Oh my gosh, and it's a colonoscopy.
Yeah, so I raised your bone marrow.
Totally.
And Lynchburg was like 100 people. Okay.
Right. And I love this, that we're having this moment, because I just want to say, like, this is the humanity in it all.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like these things happen to you and you're still like a woman, you know what I mean? Like, or a
trying
girl.
to be.
Trying. Right. Exactly. So in short, it did not hurt. It did not hurt. And I was like, okay, another lesson here. Not all things are created equal. Like people are better and worse at their crafts. So there was like all these layered lessons around, how do I speak up for myself? Is it okay to ask? Wow, I'm really lucky that I can ask. Not because they're a doctor doesn't mean they're created equal. How I feel treated by them matters to me. So I felt heard and seen when he said to me, like, I want to be sure before I decide how we're going to proceed. And in order to be sure, I need to do this procedure again, but I'm going to take care of you. Like, it's not going to hurt you. You know what I mean? So there were all of these opportunities and messages around what is a core belief of mine, like relational intelligence matters. Like how we engage with each other in crisis matters as much or more than how we engage with each other in times of like love and peace and affection. Right. So
I love that you brought up to emphasizing the relational piece to this, because often when we talk about our relationship with food, emphasis is still on the food. And what clients come to start to realize is, wait, it's how I'm relating. So how I'm using my voice is also how I'm relating to food. It's the relationship itself, or relational, that is actually what we want to examine, rather than what kind of is on the other side. I mean, it matters if it's food or conversations and the answers you get. But I think we need to understand that we're the common denominator, right?
Right. Totally. And we're really in relationship to all those core things in our lives. So money is another one that's super tricky up a lot of women, right? That's a relationship, like how we perceive,
how we use it,
how we feel about it, how we use it. Does it feel dirty to us? Do we get rid of it as soon as we have it? Does it feel like a safety blanket? And food for sure, food that hasn't been an area of like extreme focus in my life. And at the same time, I will 100% tell you, it's always there as an underlying thought. Like I have to really catch myself in my body talk as I age and have had 2 children, and you know what I mean? And as I catch myself in that body talk, it will translate into my consumption of food and so it's everywhere. It's pervasive. Like, it's really all in relationship to ourselves first, and then from there, others, food, money, exercise, wellness, creativity,
Yeah. And it's also, we can relate, like different situations bring out different ways that we relate. And I think what's really interesting about your story, and I want to really emphasize this because I don't think most people have the experience of having an authority figure when they're feeling very vulnerable, right? When you go to the doctor, whether you don't like what you weigh or you don't like the diagnosis or you can't get answers, right? And we tend to think, when we're in that vulnerable state, we tend to think we want someone who's going to tell us, this is the plan. And
right.
Right. And I think doctors, I always tell my clients, like, part of their success is their ego, right? Like if I have a surgeon who's going in, I want her or him to be like, I am the best at this.
Yeah, I do. Totally. Yeah. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And that creates incredible blind spots of being not open to what you don't know that you don't know. And for everyone listening, my dad's doctor, who's like, my dad's in his 70s, and the guy jokes with my dad. He's like, you want to stay healthy, stay away from doctors. They call it a practice for a reason, And it's really important to realize that this isn't like there is definitely standards of care in healthcare, but you are going to get different information and different experiences based on the doctor or the practitioner that you work with. And so even if you're feeling vulnerable, it's really important, I think, and to find practitioners who are willing to make sure that you feel at peace with how things are moving forward.
100%. And for me, that means feeling like I trust them, like safe. Like there means like a shared humanity. Like I want you to be the best, and I want you to be kind and listen to me. You know what I mean? And not patronizing. And so this was the beginning of me really getting clear about that. I mean, I've since changed my children's pediatrician. I changed when I moved to Colorado. I had an oncologist who was going to follow up my care, and I didn't like him. He was totally arrogant and like totally didn't listen to me. And I'm thinking, dude, I was the one who just went through this. You know what I mean? Like, I am aware and I need to be treated with respect, And so I changed to another physician in his practice. It was awkward. It's a pain in the butt to advocate for yourself like that, to move if you have to change actual offices, then you have to move records. In this case, I felt embarrassed or guilty, maybe not embarrassed. Like I was changing within his practice. You know what I mean? Like I was like, oh, he's going to know. He's going to know I chose to leave him and go down the hall. And it was the best decision I ever made. That was 15 years ago. And my current oncologist, who still monitors me, is amazing. He knows about my life. He cares about my life. He tells me new research. He's thoughtful. He listens. He doesn't scare me. That's important to me. I don't want somebody who's going to be an alarmist. So I think that a benefit is I still am never going to be a doctor. And unlike you, I don't want to know as much. So I need to find somebody that I can ask questions of, that I feel like has my best interest at heart, who will communicate and relate to me. Like my doctor, we talk about our travels. We talk about what I'm doing in my work. He sees a whole woman. He's been my doctor since before I had kids to now having children. Like there's a relationship, and in that relationship, I have more faith in my care. But I chose that. I chose him.
Well, and I think what you said about the humanity in these conversations, right? He sees you as a whole woman and the cycles that you go through. And I think when you define naked conversations, I think so many times I hear from clients, oh, I felt like I had to be fake, or I can't bring me there. And I think self-expression is how we heal. And so how have you learned, or what have you done so that, like, to talk you through that guilt of changing practices? Or because I also think, to your point, when we feel safe, we disclose information that we might not know, right? And then that we might not tell other doctors because we think they don't want to hear it, or we think it doesn't matter. But so much comes up in that space when you start that you might not know is important. And the doctor's like, wait, what did you just say about
Right. Yeah. In conversation, in a really related conversation with shared humanity, anything can come out. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's a great point.
Yeah. So how do we start to bring like more of ourselves into these conversations? Because in the work I do with clients, if we don't, we often perceive we aren't safe when we actually are. And then if we don't have intimate conversations, and by intimate, I don't mean sexual, I mean like raw, human, I like how you say them, naked. We kind of keep up this idea that we aren't safe in certain relationships, and we miss out on the deep, rich connection that's possible. So how can
where do we begin? Okay. Yeah, where do we begin? Okay, so first I want to tell people who are listening, and you just pointed to it, but naked communication does not have to do with being naked at all. It's about like peeling back the layer, although that's fun too, and you should use it in your bedroom as well. But it's about peeling back the layers of like pretense and pretending and old conditioning and messaging. And that comes from a lot of places. The way that we show up in the world comes from how we were raised, both directly from the adults who raised us, as well as the culture we were raised inside of, what our background is, what we were exposed to, how we were listened to, right? We had so many factors that impact and influence. how we see the world. And then there's societal messages and, whether or not you have value or don't have value based perhaps on what neighborhood you were raised inside of and what the streetlights looked like. And, there's so many layers that create our own cultural identity and therefore how we express ourselves or show up in the world. And naked communication is about like, how can we start to peel the onion, right? How can we start to really, really take some of that away, take some of that conditioning off and see more clearly who we are, how we want to express ourselves, how we want to connect and show up. And it's forever work. It's like, you don't just do it and you're done. There's always like another level, another layer to examine. And it usually happens in a time of new possibility, new opportunity, or new challenge, right? Some edge point. So for me and for listeners, right, it's beginning to really look at like, we could go on and on about this. I'm going to try and synthesize. What are my core values, right? What matters to me the most, and how can I speak, show up, and connect from those? So how we often do it is out of fear and pretending versus like our actual commitments. And I love this. Lynn Twist is like one of my sheroes of the world. And she wrote this book called Soul of Money. And she has fundraised millions of dollars to end hunger around the world, as well as now through the Pachamama Alliance to save the rainforest and indigenous lands. And she's in her 70s, and she was, had 3 children, was pretty much a stay-at-home mom supporting her husband's career years ago, when she really did some personal development work that led her to this idea of living a committed life. She speaks about living a committed life and having your commitments be what calls you into action, not your fears. And when she saw that, and she had an opening to support the Hunger Project, which is an organization that helps end world hunger, she like never looked back. Like she was like, it wasn't that I wasn't terrified. It wasn't that I wasn't always clear on my path, but I was clear that I had a commitment of service and of ending hunger on the planet. And that drove my actions. And I think that when we get clearer about what really matters to us, how we want to express it can become a little easier. It's still scary, to say to a doctor, like, wait, can you explain that to me more? Because I'm not sure I fully understand it, or I'm not sure that that's actually what my experience is. I'm not sure you're actually getting, that's accurate. You know what I mean? Yeah. That takes courage, right? But if we're like committed to our own healing, for example, or to our own marriage, let's say, like to love and affinity and connection, then you find from that commitment, you can sometimes find like just a little bit of everyday courage. That's what I say to people. It's like, you don't go from sitting in your living room to Oprah Super Soul Sunday, like in one second, you know what I mean? Like you have to cultivate little bits of everyday courage to be like, let me raise my hand a little bit more. Let me be a little clearer with my intention. Actually, what I would like for you to tell me is this. Actually, what I'm wondering is A, B, or C, right? You get a little courage to be a little clearer, and that's the practice. And it gets a lot easier the more you practice it.
Well, as you're talking, I'm even thinking like, I think sometimes we're like, okay, great. Now my conversations have to be completely clear and all this stuff. And to your point, no, each time you practice, you figure it out as you go. And I found that like when I'm having hard conversations that I'm not used to, like I'll even say, this is hard for me. It might come out wrong, but I have the best of intentions. And just so that like the other person softens, right? Almost the fumbling sometimes is the naked part of it.
Yeah, 100%. Yes. And with naked, I talk about clean, clear, compassionate, right? So clean means you don't bring a whole bunch of like old baggage and project it all over somebody because you've been pissed off for years or resentful of the medical establishment for decades. And so therefore you just like you regurgitate all of that sort of, you've built a case against them before they even had a chance.
That's listen to that 3 times.
That's clean, right? Like you're coming at it from this moment in this experience with this individual, right?
Yeah.
And the clear is about not hinting and hoping and wishing and implying, I really wish that they would understand this part of it. Maybe if I just tell them, well, I heard about so-and-so had this experience, clear is about like, I would like to have the least amount of radiation possible with the maximum amount of effectiveness. What is possible inside of that desire, right? Like that's clear. How can you help me make that happen? how can you help me figure out how to get the toxicity of the chemotherapy out of my body when I'm done? That's a clear request, right?
Yeah. I'm even thinking of like, I'm open to your suggestion, but I want to we're going to only give it a certain amount of time to work. And I'm thinking
totally.
Not like chemo or radiation, but I'm thinking certain medicines or even I'm working with a naturopath right now and I'm like, okay, here's our timeline. It's like,
what can we try inside of this timeline or inside of this budget? I mean,
yes.
Just really clear, they don't know.
Yeah, I think sometimes this is what I think is so fascinating is, I say that truth with food is option C. And really on a micro level, what I'm helping people do is getting out of black and white thinking.
Yes.
When we are in all or nothing, we only can see A and B. And so then we kind of feel like we don't have any choice, right? We call it no control, but what's really happening is we feel like I'm damned if I do, I'm damned if I don't. And I think deep down, we can tell that's not the satisfying choice. And when we start to become clear, as you're saying, and I loved your point about not bringing baggage, we can frame the conversation in a way and ask the questions that actually get us more to what we want. Maybe we can't get it all perfect all the time. And I mean, not perfect, ideal. But if we start with that clarity, we start to generate those options C, D, E, F, right? Rather than
absolutely. Right.
I have to take this doctor. I don't. Oh, wait, there's someone in the same practice. I don't even need to transfer my medical records. And, maybe I have to find out what days he's off when I schedule my appointments. But I'm just kidding.
Right. And you know what? Nothing ever happened with that, right? That
was
all my internal thing, though. But we do that to ourselves. And you also pointed to something in that, which I love, which is about curiosity. So there's way more space for curiosity when you're not in a binary mindset,
It's hard getting out of that, though, in the beginning. I see this with all my clients because you don't know what you don't know. And so you don't know what questions will even get you to what you don't know. And over the years, I start just leading with, what don't I know that would help me, that I should be asking here? Because
yes. Right. That's a great question, especially in the space of our healthcare. I often will ask, well, what else might be possible here?
I like that one.
What else might be possible here in the coaching that I do? It's like, how do we lean into our greatest capacity? Well, what else might be possible here? What else can we explore? And so there's just open inquiry. And I'm not always great at this. Let's be clear, right? There are times when we just get thrust back into our old patterns and then you peel off another layer and you're like, okay, but what else do I want to create? What's the option C? I love how you say that. I just want to make sure I go back to that third piece because that's what
yes.
about compassion. And that is so hard. Like when I say compassion, it's for you and for the other person because you are going to stumble. If you start trying to have intimate, vulnerable, connected conversations in your personal and professional life, because I come at this from both angles. I really believe that like the quality of your life is on a personal level and in terms of your professional success are both directly correlated to the quality of your relationships. You're going to mess it up. Like it's going to come out sideways sometimes. That is the human experience. It's so messy to be real and raw and naked with people in your life, whether it's your nurse practitioner or your partner or your children or your boss. You're going to be times, right? So that it just doesn't, you're like, oh, can I suck those? I have that experience sometimes. I want to go, can I suck those words back in? And I just like, ooh, where's the vacuum cleaner for my like overly eager mouth? Okay, darn, doesn't exist yet. So, you're going to mess it up. And that's where compassion is important. And if you can apply that for yourself and the other people as they're stumbling along, trying to meet you halfway, that's where there's the potential for real profound connection. And I believe from that connection, this might be a little heady. You and I go heady. We went super heady on when you were with me on my show too. But like, I believe from that profound connection, from that foundation of deep and real connection, we could like transform the world. We could transform educational institutions, organizations, medical establishment, when we get really relational and share that common connection of humanity, there is actually the potential for a massive organizational shift. And I think that's what excites me the most, right? Like it starts with a conversation, but the world is the end product.
But it's true, right? Like, I mean, I think about how like, they say all politics is local. And I think that's true in the sense that it's like all change is local. Like, let's think globally about how our choices are impacting other people. But at the end of the day, we have to start with ourselves. And I see even this political divide as a metaphor of like us as individuals being so divided in split inside ourselves, right? And in terms of we're missing a lot of pieces. We don't live in a culture that I don't think we live in a culture that values relationships or even this kind of messy intimacy, right? We want it polished. We want it quick. We want it off the manufacturing line. You know what I mean? And it's like, oh my God, real life is so much more messy than that. Even I'm thinking about what you were saying about compassion. In my group right now, I'm running a live Why Am I Eating This Now group. And
that's a great title. Why am I eating this now?
Yeah. It's a great program too.
Right after Halloween, we're recording this, by the way.
So. Yeah. But a couple of the women, and I just, we have very naked conversations in there. And they were saying that prior to the course, they thought compassion was kind of like weak. Like, oh, you give yourself, give yourself compassion to like eat whatever you want, or like, it's just kind of like, eh. And they're like, now I'm realizing through the program how hardcore it is to like stay with yourself when you're a beginner, and to stay with yourself when like it is your piece that you did, like you messed up, but still getting back up again. And compassion is, and I think to the point about the global change and we're split in ourselves, we have a hard time being compassionate with ourselves, which gives us less grace and compassion for other people when they mess up.
Right.
Because we haven't given it to ourselves. So
yeah, it really takes a commitment to maintain our compassion. And you know what I mean? It really takes that like repeatedly all the time. I have to remind myself of that comes up for me super huge as a parent. I have a master's in counseling psychology and my husband's a high school teacher. Like we should do parenting well, in terms of what we know. And then in terms of what we do, sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, should I do what? I know everything about what I just said was like absolutely the antithesis of what I know better about, right? So in the heat of the moment. So there's the compassion, it's a commitment again. And this is one of the things I talk about in the book is just in order to do this and to do it well, you have to recommit to it all the time, of how you're going to show up, how you're going to treat yourself, how you're going to treat other people, how you're going to ask questions, how you're going to listen, how you're going to layer on compassion. It really takes something. And I love how you bring it out to like the more macro level and a societal level. I actually think we do want to be connected. I actually think as human beings, our innate desire is this intimacy and vulnerability and depth of connection that is a longing. And I really mean like pretty much everyone, maybe barring those on like a, certain diagnostic axis of personality disorders in the DSM in my background, right? Like most human beings are craving that. What I think really gets in the way, and I see this in the political divide you're speaking of, and is fear and divisiveness, right? So it's like things that we don't know and are unfamiliar to us make us nervous. And so we pull away versus leaning forward. I think it's Brene Brown says this thing that I love so much. I never get the quote quite right. I should look it up because I say it all the time to myself and to others, but it's basically like, it's easy to hate from afar, move in, move closer. And there's risk in that, right? There's risk in that. There's risk in that, but the reward is enormous. And that's where I think we have to be driven and called from, that commitment, that reward, that potential for our own healing, our own love and affinity, and our own impact. So
I totally agree that we do want to be connected. I've mentioned this on the podcast before, and some people on Instagram were like, I have started reading the book, but this book that I just finished, it's called Ascent of Humanity by Charles Einstein. And it's an amazing book. It's 600 pages. I think some person.
Whoa.
Yeah. It's like 24 hours on audiobook, but he talks about the fundamental challenge we have. And he does draw a lot of parallels between the right and the left, is that we are disconnected from nature, which is our true nature. Mm-hmm. And I mean, the book is amazing, but he talks about, as a result of this connection, how we see everything as we are, which is disconnected and separate rather than, and he talks about how agriculture especially created this idea that we could dominate nature and we were above it. And that started to create scarcity, because before then, hunter-gatherers never had scarcity of food. They never had scarcity of time. They didn't even have concepts of time. I mean, this book is super heady. Talk about heady, but it's been, as I read it, it enabled me to soften and really listen. Because I think another part of these naked conversations is listening and hearing in new light people who seem so polar opposite of me. And I'm like, oh my God, through this book, I realized like we're both kind of saying the same thing. It's dressed up differently. For example, like people who they'll say they don't, they're really, really religious, right? And so they don't believe in evolution or anything like that. And what his argument is like, that's kind of this want, like this want for nature. There's spirit in nature. When we started putting ourselves above it, we made God outside of us, but we are all God. And that desire for like, it's not religion. He's not advocating for religion, but there is a spirit to life. And that's that like extreme version, right? If we don't have the spirit, if we don't see the spirit in each other, it comes out in this way, right? Yeah. And I'm like, and I'm like, oh my God, that's so true. Like, I want to know that there is a connection between me and someone else and everyone, and that everyone can change and is worthy of connection. And I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but it made me able to start to listen to people with very different opinions, but also hear different things in the conversation. Yeah. And I think it's actually changed a lot over the past couple of years. I mean, I still have my own blind spots. Don't get me wrong. I was just Carlos and I were just getting in an anger match on Saturday about some judgments I have that were not nuanced. I'm like, it was right after the shooting here in Pittsburgh. And I'm like, I'm in a fit of rage. There is no space for nuance right now. Like right. I was crying and I was like really angry.
Right. And that's different. That's, like I said, in the moment of crisis.
Yeah.
When you access this beautifully, that's when you have to feel raw and you have to feel the things before you can access. But there is something so beautiful in what you're saying. And it's really like, to me, it's the heart of this work is when we can see our shared humanity, when we can connect from that place, the possibilities are infinite for our own, if you didn't take it on a micro level, to our own health and wellness in terms of our own well-being with the people who share our healthcare with us, all the way to a macro level of like peace, in terms of that human thread can be brought closer together when we really, really can see the shared humanity. And, it is not, I have strong opinions and I have worked really, really hard to also listen. And I have to really stay present to that. And now I think it's one of my greatest strengths in facilitating groups and leading and having conversations is, can I see multiple perspectives? It doesn't mean I have to agree with them. I still fall on the side of what I would like to be the best course of action to solve a problem or what's right and what's wrong. But can I see their point of view? Like if that's what informs their experience, okay, that's how they see it. They don't want to tank the economy. They just think that there's a different way to support our people than I do. You know what I mean? Like, so yeah. That has been an art form, and it has been an intentional thing that my work is centered around over time, because it was, I was way more fist pumping in my 20s. I still have mostly the same values and same beliefs, but if I want people to hear me, I come at it a different way now.
Yeah. That's the key, right? Because it's interesting. I have so much capacity and empathy for people's health and emotional and stuff around food and their health, because I've really worked on that stuff myself, and I can be with so many different opinions. So I don't care if there's one diet. I don't believe one diet works for everything. Like everything about my beliefs around this stuff is nuanced and complex and
right. Yeah.
Certain issues that I
have.
Flexible,
open and flexible.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I stick to health and wellness. I tell everyone I'm a one-hit wonder. I know wellness and don't ask me about anything else. Because but there are certain issues that I have no agency, I have no choice around, because I just am still so fearful of like when I see polluters companies given carte blanche to not be regulated. I'm like, do you know we're already exponentially increasing cancer. Like it's like, and we're hitting a tipping point of toxicity. And it's like, that just scares me so much. I can't get to the other side. And then I learned, well, you know what? The regulations, no one's enforcing them anyways. So there's like an opening sometimes. And that's not true all the places, but it's a lot more nuanced, I guess, than I thought, than I originally allowed myself to think.
And you want to understand a problem from all of its facets to best be able to solve it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, and to your point about, I think it's great that we don't, I hope we all agree on each person's humanity and can acknowledge our country's history and all this stuff. And when I think about like even my doctors, like the oncologist that I had in Philly, like he was much more conservative, and I wanted him, we had very different views on things, but I wanted to go to him because I knew that was a blind spot of mine. Right. Mm-hmm. So it's like when we get more comfortable with ourselves and clear on our choices, and we can have, if we're confident in those conversations, sometimes I think people think peace is like, oh, we're all kumbayaing. And it's like, no, it's when we can all respect and be in different places, you know, including at the Thanksgiving table. Right.
Okay. Right. And I mean, you and I both, we've talked before. So I just want to it's not that there isn't action to be done to fight for what you think is good and right and peace generative in our communities. I don't sit over here and be like, oh, I understand your point of view. And I understand, you know what I mean? And so therefore all is well. No, I mean, like I listen and then I try and go from that place. Okay. What's going to be the most effective way to move forward? Because if I just like yell at the person that I think is a total ass, which believe me, I want to do sometimes, like there is zero chance of moving the needle. There's zero chance of deeper connection for brainstorming. You know what I mean? So I just think, it's a dance, but this idea of leading for connection has enormous power in it.
Oh, I love that. And I think that's a great place to end. And I think for everyone listening, I hope you said so many great things. Really think about leading with connection. Start with your existing relationships where you feel safe already, and try opening up anymore. Because isn't there so much healing in this kind of intimacy, Sage?
Oh my gosh. It's where the magic is.
Yeah.
It's where the magic, and I mean, not in a cheesy way, but like joy. It's where joy and hope lives in this kind of intimacy. And I just thank you so much for being willing to be so real in this conversation, Ali. It's such a privilege.
Oh, that's the only way I know how to be in these kind of conversations. Or kind of all of them. Carlos said I'm really good politically at the poke and jab, where I poke and like jab and then leave. He's like, you're great at the poke, jab, and then run. So I can be more spacious here. Is there anything that I forgot that you'd like to add before we wrap up?
No, I think we really covered a lot. I just want to send people off with a bit of hope that there's the opportunity at any moment in time to reconsider how you relate to the people in your life, and to just look for those opportunities for connection from the grocery store. I love talking to the clerks, all the way to your mother-in-law or your boss, and just look for how do you want to be more generative in the way you show up with the people in your day-to-day life. That's all.
That is an amazing question. How to be more generative. In other words, I love when you were saying that you like to ask what's possible. And I'm like, what don't I know? I'm like, that's so indicative of our personalities, right? Like, I want all the information so I can know what's possible. When you're like, let's just find out. But thinking what's possible in this relationship, right? Rather than going into it. Can you repeat those 3 C's again? Because they were so powerful.
Clean, clear, compassionate.
Yes, I love that. And I just wanted to put a plug in for Dr. Kristen Neff has a self-compassion quiz where you can see how you lack self-compassion. I will put that link into the show notes here, but you can also Google Kristen Neff self-compassion quiz if you don't want to go back to the show notes. But I highly recommend it because it will help you be clear on how you disconnect from your own self-compassion, because self-compassion is hardcore. So thank you so much, Sage. Where can people find more of you?
They can find me on my website, which is sagehobbs.com. And I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn and all the places. But really, I'm not that great on social, honestly, truth be told. So my website's the best place because that's where my book and my podcast are. And the second best place is probably Instagram these days.
Wonderful. And we will have all those links in the show notes as well. So thank you so much for being here, Sage.
So great to be with you, Ali.
Thank you, Health Rebels, for tuning in today. Have a reaction, question, or want the transcript from today's episode? Find me at alishapiro.com. I'd love if you leave a review on Apple Podcast and tell your friends and family about Insatiable. It helps us grow our community and share a new way of approaching health in our bodies. Thanks for engaging in a different kind of conversation. And remember, always, your body truths are unique, profound, real, and liberating.